Welcome one, welcome all to the Adventures Elsewhere podcast. Hello everyone and welcome back to the Adventures Elsewhere podcast. I am your host Jay Black, as I've actually remembered to say it this time, but it's always me. I mean, who else could have this horrific mix of accents going at any one time? Today I am talking about the importance of music in my writing. And it should be noted this isn't about playlists. I have mentioned that before. That is going to be a future episode. This is music in world and how that impacts things. As always, disclaimer, I am not here to give writing advice. I am talking about my process, my craft, and what works for me. If it works for you too, that's great. If it doesn't, well, guess what? That's kind of not my problem, so oh well. I love how that started as just a thing I said off the cuff and now it's become a thing. Oh well. So, let's start at the top here with what music means to me as a composer. Because I've mentioned before, I'm not only a writist, I am also, I can't say what struck first, I am also a composer. And I compose in many different genres, as I write in many different genres as well. And it does mean a lot to me. It's a way that I can express myself in a completely different way and just play around with things that otherwise I couldn't necessarily otherwise play with, at least not very easily. It's just nice to have a different creative outlet, and I really feel like the practice of music is something that can enrich everybody's lives, whether that be through singing or through playing an instrument. I think it's something that everybody will benefit from doing if they choose to do it, and getting into playing an instrument is sort of easier than ever at the moment, I would say, because they're not always hundreds of pounds. Don't get me wrong, you can easily pay 300 quid for a guitar, but you don't have to. But that's the thing, most people think, okay, I'm going to learn an instrument, I'm going to learn guitar or piano. And there's so much more out there. So, I mean, a really good example of a really accessible instrument is the kalimba, sometimes known as the thumb piano. And you can get those for as little as, like, 8 quid. And they're not that hard to find online or in person, so that's a really good one. And the feeling of playing music, whether that be just improvising, playing your own composition or someone else's work, it can really unlock something deep in your soul. And I think it's hard to get that feeling through other creativity, because I mean, obviously I am a writist and artist. I am a writer and artist as well, but it doesn't, and while those both allow me to express myself in deep ways, it's not the same. And that's probably why music does feature as much as it does. So what music means to me as a writer, besides the whole playlist thing, that I will talk about in an upcoming episode, as a creator from the sort of outside, I mean, I've been doing music for so long now, I mean, well over 10 years at this point, that it's quite hard to look in from the outside. But as a writer, you kind of have to, almost. At least with some of the projects I've written thus far. I'll get more into that later. You sort of realise how music does underpin certain aspects of different businesses in a world-building kind of way, and I will get into a little bit of world-building in a minute. But also how it underpins people's bonding, and how much people can bond through music, and how much music can mean to people even if they're not musical. And I think it's really cool to explore that not necessarily in an explicit way either. I think it's just one of those things that's happened for me as a writer, and I really love doing it. So getting on to music in a sort of world-building sense, and you'll see in my little side note here, yes, I really did do that for the pun, I do have a lot of world-building around music, and I'm only going to scratch the surface here because it's another episode's worth. If you want me to do that, please, by all means, let me know. I would be happy to, but that's not on my episode list at the moment. So I did scratch the surface just now about the cultural significance of music. And this does vary a little bit by each nation in the world I write about. Where somewhere like, I mean, Hyukai is as good an example as any of somewhere that really values the music and the arts. There we go, I can speak, I'm good at this, I promise. Whereas somewhere like South Fjordavik, it's not really that big of a deal in the same way. In places like Hyukai, and this is true of Amarichi and Malsar Lear and Haraith, not quite so much, but a bit. It's common to have music playing in most businesses, probably. I mean, there is a sort of line with budget places, so every bar and cafe and restaurant, bar, a very exceptional few, will have music playing. Expensive shops will always have music playing. There'll be bands and musicians playing in markets, whether that be a sort of a busking type way or whether stalls will employ musicians to play songs to help drum up sales, or instrument stalls or music shops will always have music playing and stuff like that. Some of the more budget-friendly, I guess, shops will also have music playing in them if the owner is musical or someone working at the till is musical. They'll be encouraged to play music while they're not necessarily serving anybody. Or, if it's just quiet, someone might be playing music in there. Again, people might employ musicians to help with sales because people are lured in by music. So it is kind of huge. And that is something that I really like about that world, that music is kind of everywhere, but it doesn't go unappreciated in the same way that you walk into a supermarket here in the UK, I'm sure they do the same in the US, and they're just playing absolute dross that just washes over you, you don't even notice it's there. It's not the same. I mean, especially in bars and cafes and things like that, a lot of the time it's quite hype. There's a big jazz bar, I'll get into that more later, that plays a big role, particularly in Mr. Nakagami. A lot of time I spend at the jazz bar, and there's a lot of, it's a lot of quite chill jazz, so during the day it's chill but nice, and then in the evenings, it gets a lot more peppy and everybody starts dancing and it's good fun. That's true of many establishments, that a lot of the time it's quite chilled but not, it doesn't wash over you in the same way. I think there are bound to be rock cafes and things like that. I just haven't come across those yet. That might be more of a Eastern thing because Hyukai is in the West. Yes, that's probably about all on that without getting really deep into world building. I am going to touch a little bit on musical education as well, because again, this varies a lot by nation, so I'm going to focus on Hyukai because that's the one I know. How the fuck did I just say that word? Jesus Christ. Hyukai is the nation I know best because that's the one I spent the most time in. And music education is a big thing. Like, music class is, from what I've sort of read between the lines, is actually mandatory or semi-mandatory in lower years of schooling. It might not be anymore, that might be a sort of old-fashioned thing, it might depend on how big the school is, but it's at the very least strongly encouraged that everybody takes it, at least at a low level. And many people do continue to throughout future schooling all the way up until graduation. And a lot of my characters have taken music or music-adjacent subjects. within schools there is often a focus on bringing collaboration across different classes from that. So you'll have a music class who provide the backing music for the dance class and things like that. So it's sort of joint projects, and you'll maybe have backdrops made by art students, and it's all very cool if you ask me. And music education, I mean, it's somewhat similar to what we're all familiar with in the sense that it's often focused on a couple of different instruments, but it's a select few, I guess, is the better way of saying that. And there is somewhat of a focus on music theory. That's not something I'm going to get into in this episode, but probably not so much the music theory, just as, okay, let's play progressively more difficult pieces as we go through the years, and we'll bring up the music theory as it's relevant. I mean, different teachers will take slightly different approaches to that, of course, but that's the sort of base philosophy. So let's move on to musical characters, because I do have a few of those. Ai Nagashima is one of them. He is quite artistic, and he did for a long time consider following the arts, but then life happened, really, as much as anything else. So he plays the shakuhachi, which is a Japanese flute, traditional Japanese flute, and it's a flipple flute, not a transverse, which, I mean, transverse, for what it's worth, is a sort of standard flute you'll think of with an orchestra, where it's played to the side. Flipple is played forward, like a clarinet. He plays that sort of casually. He has composed a couple of things, but, like, not significantly until very late in the timeline. I'm not going to give spoilers, but that is a thing that happens. He does enjoy playing music quite a lot, but it's one of those things that when he's busy, it's one of the first that falls by the wayside. And he is disappointed in himself for that. His relatives haven't really heard him play flute very much. Very few people know that he plays. Not because he's deliberately not told anybody, he just doesn't get the chance to do it very often, so it just doesn't really come up. Hanzo is a little bit musical, but not really. He didn't take music in school, I don't think. He's never really thought about being musical much either, but it does come up on page in Snakebite. There is a scene where, of all instruments, he ends up playing the harp a little bit, and he does get a feel for it. He can do it. Whether he would develop that into something more later is debatable. I think he might, but he might not. We'll see. But yeah, he can play a little bit. He does understand some of the underpinnings of music theory, because his brother did take music in school and taught him a lot about it. So he understands a few things, bits of theory, and some of the compositional techniques, but not really. He's definitely not a composer. Lady Asuka is a side character in Snakebite who always appears more than I think she does, but she doesn't get that much page time, I don't think. I might have that wrong, to be quite honest. She is a pianist. She is a very musical lady. She's a very talented pianist. I don't know for sure whether she composes or not. I imagine she probably does, but doesn't tell anybody about it. She's quite reserved in ways like that. But she does play piano with Hanzo. That's how he ends up playing the harp. That's not really a spoiler, but yeah, so she does play a little bit, and there is a one-line snip I did post one time that did get a fair bit of traction relating to that, which is Hanzo asking her quite how a piano was brought into her treehouse, because the nobles of Hyukai live in treehouses, and this is something that I still don't quite understand. She did dodge the question a little bit. But yeah, so that's a good example of a musical character right there. and she is even. And then we have the exception to all the rules thus far in Isamu. Isamu is the protagonist of As Seen on Stage, which is the 8th book I'll draft in the determined ones. I haven't started that yet. It's one of the 2 I haven't started as of recording this episode. He is a jazz musician by trade. That's his job. I mean, he does also work the bar a bit. He works at the jazz bar I mentioned earlier. He does work the bar a little bit sometimes when he needs to, but for the most part, he is a jazz musician. That is what he does. He plays guitar, and he also can do vocals, but doesn't, generally speaking. I have the feeling he can play other instruments as well. My instinct would be to say he can play a bit of saxophone and maybe a bit of keys, but I can't imagine he's very proficient on keys. I suspect he's quite a good sax player. He's a very, very talented guitarist, I can tell you that. He is also a very good singer. He's just underconfident, because he's leading a band who they don't have a dedicated singer, his band, but they do get guest singers in quite a lot, and they are phenomenal singers, so he's kind of intimidated to sing, but he is very good. And he does compose a lot and learns a lot of music that he hasn't composed, because, I mean, he works in a band for a bar, he has to know what the latest hits are, be that foreign hits or local hits. He has to learn them really, really quickly. And he's very, very good at that. I don't know whether he himself has had any hit songs yet. He might well have done and not told me. He's good at not telling me things. He's really bad for it, because he is a chaos demon. Well, he's not demon, he's a lovely wholesome being, but he's chaotic as hell. Yeah, he does compose a lot for his band, and those songs do get played at the bar quite a lot. I haven't really seen what that means yet, because I haven't started drafting that project, but I think that would be something really interesting to touch on relatively soon, probably, judging by the speed Shadow on the Snow is going, but don't hold me to that. Then we're going to get into the final topic I have planned, but we know what planning means on this podcast. If you've listened to any episode by now, you know how quickly things can go completely off the rails. Anyhow, notable music moments so far. So, I and Haru do bond quite a lot over music. Because the first time that I ended up going to the Leo and Spring Ball, I mean, it's a big fancy ball. At some point, you're going to be expected to dance. I did not take dance in school. Haru did. So Haru decides to take it upon himself to teach I. And the way they do this, obviously they need some music, so they end up dancing together in the bar, and it's very cute. And it's one of my favourite moments in Mr. Nakagami, genuinely. And they do bond over it, then that is something that they do quite a lot, although it doesn't appear on page all that much. There's also, I mentioned earlier, Hanzo and Lady Asuka doing a bit of a duet together on piano and harp, which is a fairly brief moment in Snakebite, but never as brief as I think. It is one of a favourite for me. I don't know whether this is because I'm a composer that I love those moments so much, but I think music does invoke a lot of emotion, a lot of quite raw feelings by definition. So you get those really delicious character moments just intrinsically, if you include music in a scene that's prominent. Now, we got the war on here as well. Shadow on the Snow is set during a war, for those that don't know. And Shinichi is the main character of that, but Ai is also did fight in the war. And there are moments where Ai does play a bit of music to try and keep morale up and probably clear his own head as much as anything. These aren't moments I've actually come to drafting as of recording this. I imagine they'll happen quite soon. It's one of the very, very, very few quiet moments in Shadow on the Snow. At least as I imagine. I'm only at 20k as of recording this. But it is something I think that will be very important and very poignant, just because of the sheer contrast. And it'll be interesting to see how Shinichi handles that, because I don't think he'll be expecting it. And when he is in a corner, he's very unpredictable. So we go back to As Seen on Stage, and how the vast majority of that project, I mean, I would estimate half of it, at the very least, is going to be all about quite what Isamu can do from the stage. Because he does meddle with things quite a lot. Partly because he just wants to, whether that be, you know, trying to get two people to get together in a sort of romantic way, or whether that's trying to calm people down, or whether he feels he has to intervene for people's safety. I mean, it's a bar, there are many, many, many shenanigans. And there is very much this sort of power of music. The power of music is probably the main theme in As Seen on Stage. Pun intended, I guess. I can't, I've got so many puns to do. The power of music in terms of just exactly what someone as talented as him in composition, but also in improvisation. Because, I mean, jazz is huge improv. I mean, composing jazz? Are you composing it, or are you just improvising it live? Who knows? And then writing it down. It's a very fine line as a jazz composer, I can tell you that. And what he can do is very interesting already from what the little I know. Seeing and living and breathing it the way he does is something I'm really, really excited for as a writist and and composer. I can't wait to get into that project. I've said that, I'm sure, about every single project in the Determined Ones, but you know, it is what I love, so it would be bad if I wasn't saying that. And really, that's kind of the end of where I'm at planning-wise, but there are a few things I do still want to bring up for you. I did mention that I have a lot of world building around music at the start of the episode, and that does include more bits around education. There's a lot about what genres are popular where, Carnatics and Carnatic singing. If you don't know what Carnatics are, and I imagine you probably don't, to be honest, unless you're a composer or high-level musician. Well, a certain type of musician, even, really. Carnatics are syllables that are used to denote degrees of a scale, which are notes in a scale, for those who just don't know music theory at all. So the classic one that people know in the UK, and I assume this is probably also true in the US, is Do Re Mi. In India, they use a different one, which is Sa Re Ga Ma Pa Da Ni Sa. And there are excuse me, there are many different types of Carnatics in this world. So Sa Re Ga is a thing in Kana, and that is what people generally use in music education, just because it's become fairly standard. But Do Re Mi is a thing in Amarichi. As far as I'm aware, every nation has their own Carnatic system, which I think is awesome, and that's something I would like to delve into if you guys are interested. So if you are, please let me know in the comments and or on Twitter. Well, they're both comments, just wherever's good for you, I don't mind. As long as you let me know if you're interested, it's all good. other music-related shenanigans, excuse me, I'll be doing in the future. I did mention I do have an episode coming at some point on playlists. Don't hold your breath on that one, I will put that out there. Because playlists are, as I've mentioned before, they're a huge help to me while drafting, but also in edits. And there will also be some musical recommendations in jazz, metal, and other genres too. And last but not least, if you are published or well on the way, please do get in touch. I am at jblack21 on Twitter if you want to DM me. If my DMs do not work, or Twitter decides that I don't want to see it for whatever reason, or you just prefer email, you can email me, jade42black@gmail.com. All the information that I will need is in the description of the video, so please do read that before you contact me. I particularly want to hear from indie pub and self-pub authors. If you're a trad pub, that doesn't necessarily mean I won't talk to you. Please, at the very least, tell me the age category, title, and genre of your work. If you don't tell me that information, then that will be most likely an automatic no. And that will be true if you just don't include the information that is below. Please do read that first. But that is the end of this episode. I am Jay Black, and for now, have a lovely rest of your day. Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider leaving a like and or subscribing to the channel if you don't want to miss out on future content. Copyright Jay Black 2023.